Hi, and welcome to another episode of NCBA's Coffee Break. I'm Nathan Wilner, Vice President at NCBA, and I am excited to have Brandon Speaks join us, the Senior Vice President at Provana, to talk about what's going on at Provana, some exciting initiatives, and some great advice for member firms. So, Brandon, why don't you tell our audience a little bit about yourself and about Provana, and then we'll get into it.
Sure. Good morning, Nathan. So I'm Brandon Speaks, Senior Vice President at Provana. I lead everything that we do from an offering to our legal vertical, which includes collection law firms, foreclosure, bankruptcy, personal injury, kind of anything within the broader legal space. I've been at Provana for 10 years, and my background before that was running operations for a debt collection law firm for an additional 10 years.
So, you are quite familiar with the creditors' rights litigation and debt collection space. Uh, so,
Yep,
uh,
very much so.
yeah, it's not your first rodeo, so to speak. But most companies talk about business process outsourcing, um, and they use the term as business process management. Can you explain like the difference between the two terms, and you know what is it that people are looking for when they're thinking about outsourcing in general?
Sure. So, more traditional business process outsourcing is primarily a staffing and staff management solution. As we've kind of created this branding around business process management, there's really kind of three key components. The first one is that it's much more outcome driven than staffing driven. So, there's a couple different ways we'll look at that. And I'm just going to give a handful of examples here, but one is the way that we look at productivity based on KPIs as opposed to just providing humans. So the way this might tactically look is we say for a given type of transaction, a person should be able to complete, let's say, 100 units per day. So when we talk about staffing with a firm, what we're really talking about is the delivery of that number of units at that right level of quality. And the actual number of humans that it takes to deliver that is really our problem, not the firm's problem. So what the firm is getting is this ideal level of output for any work that we're doing with humans. That's not only ongoing, but also, as firms know, if you hire new staff and you're training them, people aren't fully productive for a period of time. We're providing that fully productive level right from day one. So it's all about the final output. One of the other pieces is this also is inclusive of QC and training and all those other things. So when we're looking at what we deliver to the firm, all of that's completely included. There's none of the staff time taken out that firms are paying for going to some of these other very necessary activities. Um, Another piece of that, kind of staying on this outcome theme, is a lot of times we'll have ownership over, targets and performance metrics that the firm is trying to hit, where our team becomes responsible for things like staffing allocation, cross training, how we might look at using multiple shifts, so a US day shift, US night shift, to hit overall capacity or timeline targets. The next piece that I think is different with business process management compared to business process outsourcing is it's also inclusive of tech plus humans. So we have a number of different kind of automation tools that we'll
Yeah.
incorporate into the offering.
So tell me
And
a little bit about, that tech human approach of how do you incorporate that?
sure. So I'll give you some kind of real examples of what that looks like. So first off, our goal is to provide a comprehensive solution that might include both pieces. So a lot of companies sell either a tech solution or a human solution. Um, one might be we have a call analytics tool that's used by a lot of firms and actually some creditors and debt buyers as well. And there's a tool that feeds in 100% of the call recording minutes, runs it through an analytics engine. However, unlike most other providers, our team does all of the initial configuration. We do all of the ongoing calibration, and we also provide staff that will listen to potentially flagged calls and then feed that back into either that calibration or that coaching loop. Um, Another example would be a redaction tool that we have that uses OCR to do automatic redaction of documents. But again, in addition to the tool, we provide humans that do QC. So for every document type, there's a confidence interval that's generated, and certain sample sizes will feed back to people. And we can also provide it with different levels of manual intervention. So something like a credit card statement, nearly perfect every time. If you're looking at something like an older mortgage document where you might have handwritten things, the OCR is not necessarily as reliable, so we can provide higher levels of human support to ensure that the client is getting back the ideal output either way.
It sounds like to me that you're using um, both technology, but technology on its own or alone isn't enough. It's the human uh, aspect that you're adding in to give that extra level of compliance. Is that just I just
Correct.
want to for maybe
Yeah,
for our listeners to understand.
exactly. And with
Mhm.
most tools that firms would buy, you get the tool, but then they have to figure out how do we configure it, how do we run it, how do we staff around kind of any of the exceptions, and we try to kind of provide the whole thing. Um,
Mhm.
Another example would be like for automated e-filing. We
Mhm.
have tools that either using API or RPA bots may work with different court sites. However, there's a lot of manual steps that still end up being involved in that. So, the initial kind of file prep to some degree, depending on how that comes out of the firm's platform. But things like OCR splitters that then break the documents apart to match the individual jurisdiction requirements. A lot of times there's some level of exceptions that come out of that. We can have team members complete that as well. Or, very importantly, looking at, places where you might have exceptions. So if the tool is flagging something saying, hey, in this county, you need a last payment statement that's missing, it'll flag it for an exception. We can provide the humans that run all of the steps. So again, from a firm perspective, they're getting, this mostly automated, very quick solution, but they don't have to worry about kind of all of the pieces required to make it work. We can provide this blended output. And even for some states where we might not have as high an automated solutions, like Florida, API driven, almost completely automated. Ohio, where you have a lot of states with different court sites, then it's more RPA based. There may be more human intervention. From the firm side, they get the same output either way. And again, it becomes on our team to figure out how do we blend tech and people to make sure the firm is getting that result.
Right. And I know, like in jurisdictions like in Maryland, not all the counties came online at the same point. So you would have some that maybe, were, very experienced in how to use e-filing, and some like
Mhm.
Baltimore City, which is relatively new. And again, if you don't have folks that know how to maneuver and navigate that, even though you think you know the state, it's the county by county that makes all the difference, right?
Correct, correct. And the tech component of it, that really helps drive down the cost and speed up the whole process. But, again, if you're using it only a tech product, figuring out where you have more or less human intervention ends up being on the firm. Whereas with our offerings, we can again provide that comprehensive solution where the firm gets the cost and speed benefit of automation, but they don't have to worry about where their staff may have to get involved.
Got it. And many times things change, right? In other words, you could have a county
Mhm.
or a state that started an e-filing program, and then as it goes on, they developed different, um, different portals or different links they want. Again, like you mentioned, you could have a
Mhm.
lawsuit where one county or one jurisdiction they want one document, the
Mhm.
pleading and all the attachments, and then some each exhibit is a separate filing, and if you don't break them out, they'll kick it back, and those kinds of things, and you need to know.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And that's a place too where we can launch a solution that might have more human intervention and the tech side of it becomes larger over time. Another great example of that would be some of our mailroom automation tech, where we use OCR to both identify and rename documents kind of on the front end. And when we're launching with a firm, oftentimes very high percentage of the documents can be identified and a small percentage are going to humans. However, when you come to extracting data from the documents, so things like judgment information or hearing notice information, usually at the start, OCR might extract a little bit of that, but humans are doing a fair amount of it as well. But then over time, we're able to incorporate more and more tech and drive the cost of the offering down. But from a throughput perspective on the firm side, they get all of the benefit from a result right away as we keep implementing more and more tech over time.
Right. And as you know, like not all the documents, some I still see some documents that have handwritten notes from a clerk or from a judge. And
Mhm.
again, if you don't know what you're looking at, the computer is not going to recognize it, and it takes a human being to kind of to get their eyes to look at the right place, so to speak.
Yep, and that's a place where, if everything is just kind of typed out in the normal places, we can run it through OCR and then automatically flag if human handwriting is detected to go to a person to QC and make sure everything was correct.
Okay, that's cool. Yeah. Um, so are there other ways that you use tech besides, the ones we just mentioned, redaction, e-filing, mail processing? Do you use it for scrubs, or what other ways do you use it?
Yeah, so we do have a scrub tool that some firms use as well, but I think kind of separate from our platform or kind of our more productized tech, we also have tech that both supports outsourcing that we use internally to deliver on outsourcing. So a couple examples of that. Many firms are familiar with IPACS, which is our compliance management platform, which is a great standalone platform. However, it also has very key pieces that help with the delivery of using an outsourced team. So things like how SOP updates have version control, how, let's say, our team could receive instructions from a firm, update an SOP, it automatically goes back to the process owner or an attorney to sign off. Then it kicks down to the associates who are assigned to do the work, forces them to certify, and then tracks all that within the firm's platform. So again, those are all great features anyway, but particularly if you're managing a large remote team, those become even more important. Um, Another example would be we have an analytics platform that a number of firms use that, again, is a great standalone platform to get better performance information than what you can typically get out of transaction systems. However, our team will also use that same data to do production planning with firms. So to figure out, hey, this month you were using 10 FT of staffing. We see your placements went up. Next month you might need 12. The month after that, you might need a little bit more because those placements are flowing from, suit into post judgment or wherever. It also helps us be more consultative with firms and look for, performance opportunities, which is something else we like to focus on. Now, in addition to those platforms that firms are familiar with, we also have some proprietary software that we've built that helps us with our back-end delivery. An example of that would be how we do our QC process. So, right now, I think our team is working on around 8,000 SOPs across our client base, and every one of those SOPs needs to have QC done every day. We do QC within 24 hours of transactions. So one of the things that this platform will do, in addition to assigning work and tracking productivity, is take random sampling of the transactions for every SOP from every employee and present it back to an auditor along with a firm-approved QC checklist, and then track the results and put them back into Power BI dashboards that we can monitor and then also share with the firm.
So
So
I would think that saves firms a lot of time when they're going through audits or when their clients want data, or even if a regulator wants data. It's makes it much easier, I would think.
yeah, absolutely. It helps with all of that. If you get into things like bona fide error, you have this very structured, documented process. But even before you get to that point, it just helps ensure quality delivery by being able to kind of build these larger scale tools that firms would be unlikely to be able to implement kind of on their own in much smaller shops.
And I guess it also saves money because if you see a decrease in placements, you can say you don't need 10, you need 8 folks. In other
Yeah,
words, you can adjust in other words, you can ramp up or you could scale down depending on what's going on.
yeah. Part of our model is we do provide flexible staffing levels with firms. So we always do have dedicated resources and kind of a core team. But firms being able to change volume based on placements, we can scale up and down a lot faster than what they can do locally. Locally, if you need to add a couple people, you're putting out an ad, you're going through an interview and hiring process, you're bringing people on and training them. Because we're
Mhm.
doing so much similar work for so many different firms, we have really a bench of kind of trained people that need to learn the firm's SOP, but they don't need to go through all the basic industry training. So, if someone calls us up and says, hey, we need, 5 more people and we really want them in a week or two, that's very easy for us to do, which would be almost impossible to do with local staff.
Yeah, yeah, it sounds like definitely a convenience. Um, we're talking a lot about helping firms with performance, and I know you kind of mentioned it, but how does that work specifically?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting part of our model. We always try to, kind of at a high level, be very consultative about the performance aspect. And one of the big pieces from my perspective is I think oftentimes you can get a bigger advantage when you're focusing on top line revenue more than just kind of pure costs. So with costs, you can have cost reductions. Those can be meaningful on your P&L. However, there's usually a lot more room before you kind of hit that ceiling on the revenue side. And here's kind of an example of that, even thinking about, well, I'll jump back to our call monitoring platform. So let's say if a firm has 10 to 15 collectors, their cost to do a call monitoring program is probably 5 to 6,000 a month in potential savings if we implement some automation tools and outsourcing kind of combined there. However, if you think about it, if instead of just focusing on becoming compliant and reducing costs there, if you're finding coaching opportunities of how you take that analytics data and help collectors do better, if those same 10 to 15 collectors become just 10% better by running all of their calls through analytics engine, you're looking at collections that could easily be, 100, 150,000. So now you're looking at, instead of a $5,000 cost decrease, you're looking at, a $20,000, $30,000 revenue increase through the same tool. So both sides are meaningful, but a lot of times the top line can be bigger. Another example would be, a very frequent place that we start working with firms on the outsourcing side is post-judgment. And that's one of the places where I see firms really differentiate themselves from each other in terms of performance. Most firms are pretty similar on suit rates, but post-judgment can vary a lot. Now, with
And
traditional outsourcing,
I guess that also is different from state to state, right? Every state has
yeah.
different rules too.
Mhm. With traditional outsourcing, if you're going to come in and say, hey, we're going to help you with post judgment, what you'd really be trying to do is cut the cost of labor to deliver by about 40%, which again is impactful. That means a lot. However, if instead of reducing costs by 40%, what you're doing instead is taking that same spend and increasing the number of garnishments you're putting out by 40%, that's a
Hmm.
much, much larger number. And then if you're able to also improve some of the workflow around that to not just increase the garnishments by 40%, but improve the rate of successful to unsuccessful garnishments, you could have maybe a 50% increase in garnishment revenue. And that could easily be 5 to 6 times what you would have saved on the cost side from focusing on kind of more traditional, just cost cutting alone. And then the other part that's harder to quantify that I think really ties into that is what the market share implications are from focusing on that revenue collections and performance. If firms are able to improve their performance, from their call center, from their garnishment team in meaningful ways, oftentimes that gets them additional placements as well. So that's something that we have our consulting team really focus on spending a lot of time with firms working on because, firms improve performance, their clients are happier, they get more work, we end up getting more work. It ends up really being a, win-win-win for all parties involved.
Yeah, so this has really been fascinating. And also, I'm thinking that this is an opportunity for even smaller firms to kind of level the playing field with the larger firms because they can take advantage of the same kind of processes and technology and products that maybe they don't have the resources
Yeah.
to do
That,
in-house.
that's always been a big part of our model, even outside this industry, just broadly speaking, is taking the same types of advantages and tools that are used by, Fortune 500 companies and bringing them down to, 20, 30 person businesses that would never be able to implement on their own. But because we're able to do it again across a very large client base, we can leverage that scale and, provide those same types of benefits to very small companies.
Yeah, so that was really fascinating. It brings us to the end of our cup of coffee, so to speak.
Mhm.
But yeah, this is, and again, it also kind of shows the importance of the human part of the process. I mean, I think with
Mhm.
AI and so much technology, people think there's no people involved. It's just a machine, and clearly, um, you see how the human element makes such a big impact and is
Yeah.
necessary to be effective. So I think that's going to bring us to the end of our coffee break. I hope you'll come back another time, as they say, when Brandon speaks, people listen. And with that, have a great day, and thank you to our listeners for tuning in today. Have a
Yeah, thanks.
great
You
day,
too.
everyone. Be well.